A door closed softly somewhere down the hall. No one rushed. No one asked questions. A woman stood still under the lights, her reflection staring back at her like a stranger. Something had shifted, and everyone felt it, even if no one said a word. In Hollywood's golden age, power didn't need to shout. It moved quietly, behind closed doors, hidden in plain sight. The faces on screen looked perfect, untouchable. But off camera, the truth was harder to look at. Some stars didn't just live complicated lives. They left a mark on everyone who crossed their path. And once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Number 1, Ramon Novarro. A man answered the door late at night. He wasn't expecting anyone. There was a pause, just long enough to feel wrong. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Nothing looked out of place at first glance. But something in the air had shifted. By morning, the story would be everywhere. Ramon Novarro. At the height of Hollywood's silent era, he was everything a leading man was supposed to be. Handsome, elegant, effortlessly charismatic. He rose to fame in the 1920s, becoming one of the industry's most admired stars. Audiences saw him as a romantic hero, a man who seemed almost too perfect to be real. But behind that image, Novarro lived a life built on silence. In an era controlled by strict studio rules and public expectations, he was forced to hide who he truly was. His private world remained carefully guarded, known only to a few. The pressure to maintain that illusion never truly left him. As the years passed, the spotlight faded. New faces replaced old legends. And like many stars of that era, he slowly slipped out of public view. But the real tragedy came much later. In 1968, his life ended in a way no one could have imagined. He was murdered inside his own home during a robbery. The crime was brutal, shocking, and deeply unsettling. What made it worse was how vulnerable he had become, far removed from the glamour that once defined him. The news sent ripples through Hollywood, not just because of who he was, but because of what it revealed. Fame had protected his image, but it couldn't protect his life. Ramon Novarro was remembered as a star, a symbol of classic cinema at its peak. But his story didn't end under bright lights. It ended in silence. Number 2, Barbara Payton. She walked onto the set like she already owned the room. Heads turned. Conversations paused. There was something about her, something impossible to ignore. At first, it looked like confidence. But it didn't take long before people realized it was something else. Barbara Payton. In the late 1940s, she arrived in Hollywood with everything the industry wanted. Striking beauty, natural presence, a face that cameras loved. Studios saw potential. Audiences saw a rising star. For a moment, it felt like nothing could stop her. But behind the spotlight, her life moved fast, too fast. Her relationships were intense, unpredictable, and often public. Romances turned into scandals. Arguments turned into headlines. And before long, her name wasn't tied to her work anymore. It was tied to chaos. One of the most talked about moments came during a violent love triangle that spiraled out of control. Fights broke out. Accusations spread. The story dominated the press, and suddenly, her career took a back seat to her personal life. Directors grew hesitant. Studios pulled away. The same industry that once welcomed her began to close its doors. And the fall was just as fast as the rise. As the years passed, the roles disappeared. The attention faded. But the damage didn't. Struggles with alcohol and instability only made things worse, pulling her further away from the life she once had. What started as promise turned into decline. Barbara Payton didn't just lose her career. She lost the version of herself Hollywood once believed in. In the end, her story became something else entirely. Not a tale of fame, but a warning. Number 3, Peter Lorre. He didn't need to raise his voice to make people uncomfortable. It was in the eyes, the stillness, the way he could look at you and make it feel like he already knew something you didn't. On screen, he became the face of unease. Off screen, that feeling never fully disappeared. Peter Lorre. From the moment he appeared in films, audiences couldn't look away. His performances were haunting, precise, unforgettable. He had a way of turning silence into tension, of making even the smallest role feel dangerous. Hollywood quickly found a place for him. Villains, outsiders, men you weren't sure you could trust. And he played them so well. People started to wonder where the performance ended. But behind that image was a man carrying more than just roles. After a serious medical procedure early in his career, Lorre was prescribed morphine. What began as treatment slowly turned into dependence. And over time, that dependence followed him everywhere. On set, it showed missed cues, unpredictable behavior, moments where the line between character and reality felt blurred. Directors noticed, co-stars noticed, but few said anything out loud, because the performances were still there, still powerful, still unforgettable. Yet the cost kept rising. His health began to suffer. Opportunities became harder to hold on to, and the same intensity that made him brilliant started to isolate him. Peter Lorre remained one of cinema's most distinctive actors, a presence that couldn't be copied, a voice that couldn't be ignored. But behind the scenes, the darkness he portrayed so convincingly wasn't always acting. Number 4. Lana Turner. It started with a scream inside a quiet house. Then came the sirens. Then came the headlines. And suddenly, Hollywood wasn't talking about a movie anymore. Lana Turner. She was the definition of glamour in old Hollywood. Camera lights seemed made for her. Every appearance looked like a scene carefully designed for the screen. To the public, she was elegance, beauty, and star power combined into one image. But behind that image, her life was anything but controlled. The turning point came in 1958. A night that began like any other, ended in tragedy. Inside her home, a violent confrontation unfolded involving her teenage daughter and her boyfriend, Johnny Stompanato. In a sudden moment of chaos, Stompanato was fatally stabbed during the struggle. What followed was not silence, but a media storm. Reporters surrounded the story. Courtrooms filled with speculation. And Hollywood watched as one of its brightest stars became the center of one of its darkest scandals. Lana Turner didn't disappear from the screen, but something about her image changed forever. Behind the glamour, there was now a shadow that never fully left. A reminder that even in the most polished lives, violence and fear can exist just beneath the surface. She continued working, continued appearing in films. But the world no longer saw only the star. They saw the story behind her name. And in Hollywood, once that happens, it never fully fades. Number 5. Clark Gable. He stepped onto the screen like nothing could touch him. The confidence, the silence, the way he looked at the camera like it belonged to him. For a moment, audiences didn't watch a character, they watched certainty. Clark Gable. To the world, he was the king of Hollywood. A man defined by charm, strength, and effortless control. His name alone could fill theaters. His presence alone could carry a film. But behind that carefully built image, life was more complicated. Away from the screen, Gable lived with secrets he rarely spoke about. Relationships that stayed out of the spotlight. Rumors that followed him but were never confirmed in public. And a personal life that never fully matched the romantic heroes he portrayed. There were affairs. There were private tensions. And there were moments where the mask of perfection slipped, just enough for those close to him to notice. To fans, he was untouchable. To insiders, he was human, flawed, guarded, and careful about what the world was allowed to see. Even his marriages carried that weight. Public on paper, private in reality. Love and distance existing at the same time. And still, the image remained intact. Because Hollywood didn't just create stars like Clark Gable. It protected them. But protection doesn't erase truth. It only delays it. And in Gable's case, the truth was always just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to be seen. Number 6. Joan Crawford. The house looked perfect from the outside. Clean, quiet, controlled. The kind of place that suggested nothing could ever go wrong inside it. But perfection doesn't always tell the truth. Joan Crawford. She wasn't just a star, she was a force. One of the most powerful women in Hollywood's golden era. Every movement felt calculated. Every performance carried intensity. She didn't just act in scenes, she dominated them. To the public, she was ambition in human form. A woman who fought her way to the top and refused to step down. But behind closed doors, her world was far more complex. Those who knew her closely described a home ruled by strict discipline and emotional pressure. Expectations were high. Mistakes were not easily forgotten. And silence often said more than words ever could. Then came the moment that changed everything. Years later, a memoir titled Mommy Dearest was published by her adopted daughter. What followed were shocking allegations, claims of emotional instability, strict control, and abuse that painted a very different picture of the star the world admired. The industry reacted in shock. Fans were divided. Some refused to believe it. Others began to see her legacy differently. Because once an image like that breaks, it never fully repairs. Even after her death, the conversation didn't stop. It followed her name, her films, her legacy. Joan Crawford remained a legend of the screen. But now, she was also part of one of Hollywood's most controversial stories. And in Hollywood, legends are never remembered in just one way. Number 7. Charlie Chaplin. The screen went silent, but the world didn't stop watching. A small figure, a bowler hat, a walk that made millions laugh without a single word. But behind that silence was a mind the world would never fully understand. Charlie Chaplin. He wasn't just a performer. He was cinema itself in motion. One of the most influential figures in film history. A man who turned silence into storytelling and emotion into art. To audiences, he was pure genius. Creative, brilliant, untouchable. But behind the camera, his life carried controversy that followed him for years. Relationships with much younger women drew public criticism. Marriages became headlines. And his private life slowly turned into a topic the press couldn't ignore. Then came something even bigger than scandal. Politics. During the rise of Cold War tension, Chaplin's outspoken views and suspected sympathies made him a target of scrutiny in the United States. The admiration he once received began to shift into suspicion. And in 1952, everything changed. While traveling abroad, he was informed that his re-entry permit to the U.S. had been revoked. Just like that, the country he helped entertain for decades no longer welcomed him. Chaplin made a decision. He settled in Switzerland, far from Hollywood, far from the world that once celebrated him. But even in exile, his legacy didn't fade. His films remained. His influence grew. His name became permanent in cinema history. Yet his story carried a contradiction that never left it. A man who made the world laugh, but could never fully escape the world's judgment. Number 8. Roscoe Arbuckle. It started with a party. Laughter, music, flashing cameras. A night that was supposed to be ordinary in Hollywood's fast-moving world. But by morning, everything had changed. Roscoe Arbuckle. He was one of the biggest stars of the silent film era. A comedy legend. A man audiences adored. His screen presence was effortless, his timing unmatched. For a time, he was among the highest-paid actors in Hollywood. But fame can collapse faster than it rises. In 1921, Arbuckle became involved in a scandal that shook the entire industry. During a party at a San Francisco hotel, actress Virginia Rappe fell seriously ill and later died. Arbuckle was accused and suddenly found himself at the center of a national media storm. What followed was not just one trial, but 3. The first 2 ended without a verdict. The third ended in acquittal, with the jury even issuing a rare apology. Legally, he was cleared, but in the public's eyes, the damage was already done. Hollywood distanced itself. His career collapsed almost overnight. The same industry that once celebrated him turned away in silence. Because in that era, reputation mattered more than verdicts. And once trust was broken, it rarely returned. Roscoe Arbuckle never fully recovered his place in Hollywood. A man once loved by millions, reduced to a name surrounded by controversy. And his story became one of the earliest reminders that in Hollywood, fame is fragile and forgiveness is rare. Number 9. Errol Flynn. He didn't enter a room, he took it over. A smile, a look, a confidence that felt effortless. The kind of presence that made people forget everything else around them. Errol Flynn. On screen, he was the perfect hero. Swashbuckling roles, romantic charm, pure cinematic energy. He became one of the biggest stars of Hollywood's golden era. But off-screen, the story was very different. Flynn lived fast. Too fast. Nightlife, parties, alcohol, and constant headlines followed him everywhere. What looked like freedom to the public was often chaos behind the scenes. And then came the moment that changed everything. In 1943, Flynn faced a highly publicized statutory rape trial involving 2 underage girls. The case became a national sensation. Hollywood watched as its most famous leading man stood at the center of a scandal that refused to disappear. Although he was ultimately acquitted, the story never truly left him. In fact, it followed him for the rest of his career. To some, he was still a star. To others, he had become something else entirely. A symbol of excess. A symbol of unchecked fame. As the years went on, his lifestyle took a toll. His health declined. His reputation shifted. His image changed, but the legend remained complicated. Because Errol Flynn was never just a hero on screen. He was a reminder that in Hollywood, charm and destruction often walk side by side. Number 10. Bette Davis. She didn't try to look perfect. She tried to be unforgettable. Every glance on screen carried intensity. Every line felt like it had weight behind it. When she appeared, the scene didn't belong to anyone else. Bette Davis. She was one of Hollywood's most powerful and respected actresses, known for fearless performances and a personality that refused to be softened for the camera. She built a career by doing something dangerous in that era. She didn't obey expectations. But strength in Hollywood often comes with conflict. Davis had a reputation for being difficult to work with. Studios pushed back. Co-stars clashed with her. And she fought constantly for control over her own career at a time when women rarely had it. Off-screen, her life was just as intense. Marriages ended in disappointment. Relationships carried tension. And her dedication to work often came at a personal cost, especially in her family life. Yet she never stepped back. Even when she was labeled difficult, she kept pushing forward. Even when the industry resisted her, she kept proving them wrong. Because for Bette Davis, acting was not just a career, it was survival. Over time, her struggles and victories became impossible to separate. The personal and professional merged into one powerful legacy. She didn't leave behind a simple story. She left behind something more complicated. A reminder that in Hollywood, strength is never soft. And greatness often comes with a price.